We hear, brothers and sisters, in the first reading, this decree that God seems to be saying against Ahab. And what we notice about this is, very simply put, that oftentimes in the Old Testament, God is just decreeing what the consequences of someone's sins are naturally going to be. And we see that in the case of this situation. We know this to be the truth because God doesn't change. And if God sent Jesus, his Son, to die for the sins of all, which he did, if Jesus, who came to reveal to us the heart of God the Father, says to us that we are to love our enemies, we notice that God doesn't necessarily decree this against Ahab out of hatred. We know also from the encyclical Spe Salvi from Pope Benedict XVI that sometimes God allows things to happen to put an end to a person's sinning as an act of mercy. And it's beyond us sometimes in terms of the mystery of what God will allow. That's God's permissive will. But we know it's not God's will for the person to suffer the consequences of their sins. In fact, we see God changing this, right? Declaring what the result now is, now that Ahab has changed and gone about subdued. After hearing what's going to be the natural consequences of his sins, Ahab's heart is moved to at least some penance. But imagine, had Ahab gone a step further and began to ask God for mercy upon his family, had he not just been subdued because of the idea that something might happen to him, imagine had Ahab been moved to complete and total repentance and began to live a penitent life in such a way, he could have also obtained for his family that release. Not just that the evil that had been brought through his actions might not affect him, but that it might also not affect his family as well. So, we see, as we said yesterday, evil actions end up wounding not just one person, but ends up wounding a bunch of people, and sin begets sin, evil begets evil. Love begets love, and this is what we see with Jesus. This is what we see Jesus is saying to us. This is why Jesus is asking of us such a radical heart toward even people who have done wrong to us. Jesus says from the cross, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." These are difficult words. They're difficult words for us who don't want to forgive at times, who don't want to act with mercy towards our enemies at times. We see that God is calling us to have such a great love that we could see each and every single person as a brother and a sister, wanting their good, wanting that they experience the same blessings that we can experience in our relationship with Christ. And we have a good example of that kind of a situation in the life of St. Francis. If you remember that St. Francis went to Damietta in Egypt during the Fourth Crusade. And seeing what was going on, he was stirred up in compassion and love for the Muslims in Egypt. So much so, he did not want there to be a war that would end up taking their lives. And he figured to himself that the best way to avoid the war would very simply be for him to go and convert the Sultan. And the Sultan would then, by changing religion, then he could just simply end the war that way. So he goes to meet Sultan Malik al-Kamil. And the two have such an encounter that though the Sultan does not end up changing his religion, he comes to see that before him is one who is truly seeking God, even if he's not seeking God the same way that that he as a Muslim is seeking. And then Francis also sees that this Muslim is truly seeking God, even if he's not seeking God the same way that St. Francis is. The two have this encounter. And it's interesting to note what happens during that campaign in Egypt. That the Christian army is against Damietta to such an extent that they end up starving out the people in a way. The Sultan, who's in another town, has an opportunity later when the Christian army is without supplies to completely and totally demolish them. He chooses not to. Instead, he sends them bread and allows them to go home in peace. Such a moving testimony about the words of Jesus. And we see that sometimes Jesus uses people who aren't of the same faith as us, like the Good Samaritan, to be able to show us examples of exactly what he's talking about. If you haven't seen the PBS documentary, The Sultan and the Saint, I recommend it. It is a beautiful testimony to the true seeking of the good with people of goodwill, even in difficult circumstances. Today, before us, we have this Eucharistic sacrifice. Jesus, who makes present to us once again all of the forgiveness of sins and all of the healing. And we want to be a little bit like Ahab in one regard, to recognize our own sins, but also to recognize how perhaps our sins have perhaps wounded other people that we didn't intend to wound. And so we can bring all of that to this Eucharist. The graces in the Eucharist are infinite. There is no end to them. So we can ask the Lord to not only bless us with the same graces of receiving him, but also to add intention upon intention. And so very simply put, too, at the same time, recognizing that these graces are infinite, that the blessings know no end, we can ask the Lord also for the forgiveness and the healing of all the things that have happened from our past generations as well. Asking that the Lord not only forgive the sins, but also heal the effects of the sins of our ancestors, going back however far. All the way back to Adam. All the way back to Adam. We can believe for that, because nothing is impossible with God, right? And his grace is infinite. His power is infinite, meaning it does not have an end. So as much grace, it doesn't diminish the graces we would receive if we ask for that many blessings, right? It just says to God, hey God, we want the mother load, or in other words, the father load in this case, right? We want those blessings. But we can also ask too. We can also ask for blessings upon all those who have done wrong to us, and all those who have done wrong to our own ancestors. We can ask that here at this Mass, here at this Eucharist, bringing all these intentions to Jesus. Asking that anybody who has wounded us in any particular way, that they might have not only a radical encounter with Jesus to know his love and to know his mercy and his forgiveness, but that they can truly have the healing of their own woundedness too, that they might be blessed. I can think of some people from my past, especially when it's those close relationships, right, where they wound you the most, and it seems to stay with you the longest. So I can think of some people myself that I'm going to be bringing to the Lord this day, but also just entrusting the Lord with everything in terms of what we've done and what our own ancestors have done, for healing and for forgiveness. So this we look to do so that our hearts can truly be like the hearts of Jesus, like the hearts of our Father. That is, wishing the good for others, since Jesus died for us when we were enemies with him.